Hello and welcome to South First. I am Anusha Ravisood and you're watching State of Play, our daily roundup of all things politics, policy and human interest. 241 passengers and crew members on board Air India's flight that took off from Ahmedabad and crashed within a matter of seconds were declared dead. They were traveling on board Air India's AI171 being run on Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner series. This has come to be one of the worst aviation tragedies India has ever witnessed, with only one sole survivor who escaped miraculously with injuries. What makes this crash even worse is the fact that it crash landed in a residential locality, especially one doctor's hostel attached to a hospital in Ahmedabad. This incident has left several people on ground dead as well as injured. South First personally confirmed at least 3 medical students were dead following this crash into a medical or a doctor's hostel in Ahmedabad. More than 50 people were injured, including resident doctors, students, their kin, and others. There are many questions. What really happened on board this ill fated flight that took off and barely within seconds crashed outside the perimeter of the Ahmedabad International Airport? What really led to this huge aviation tragedy? Was it human error? Was it a mechanical error? Was it a technical error? These are the questions that are being raised. But let's remember that only a thorough investigation will really give us concrete answers. But even before the investigation has begun and has started piecing together the reasons as to what happened, what brought this flight down, several theories are already doing the rounds. One piece of advice: before you get carried away with the theories that are making the rounds, let's remember what we have right now is one witness account, the survivor, who told several media organizations that he heard a huge boom, a loud noise just after takeoff, and a few video footages, including a CCTV footage from the airport that shows this particular flight taking off right off the runway, gaining very little altitude before it starts dropping altitude. It becomes obscure behind a line of trees and buildings, and within seconds, you see a huge ball of fire, which means there was a huge explosion. This flight had a full tank. It was taking passengers from Ahmedabad to London. It was a long haul flight, and naturally, it was all fully loaded as far as fuel is concerned. Even as I reiterate that we really do not know what exactly happened, and just a little bit of footage here doesn't give us an idea of what led to this huge tragedy. Several pilots who have flown this sector, who have flown this particular aircraft, and aviation experts, both international and national, have been speaking to several media organizations and they have offered some theories. But before I head into the theories that are being offered, let me just tell you that this isn't the first time that we have seen an aviation tragedy. Just in the last 25 years, since 2000, India has seen several aviation tragedies. We have lost more than 510 people in these aviation tragedies involving planes. I am not including helicopters here because helicopter crashes have also killed hundreds of people, and that adding that to this plane crash numbers will only increase the number multifold. Just with plane crashes, both military and civil aircrafts, we have seen over 510 deaths just in the last 25 years. I'm citing some of the instances that we have seen in the last 25 years, and the death toll here comes up to 519. There are some survivors also in these crashes, but the number of casualties far outweigh the number of survivors when you put all of these numbers together. On 17th of July 2000, we saw an Alliance Air Flight 7412 crashing at a residential estate in Patna after the pilot allegedly lost control. The deaths included 55 people on board the aircraft and 5 others on ground. Just 10 years later, in 2010, one of the most ghastly instances of aviation tragedies that we have seen in Karnataka, in Mangaluru, on the 22nd of May in 2010, Air India Express Flight 812, a Boeing, once again, a Boeing 737-800, flying the Dubai Mangalore route overshot the runway in Mangaluru airport, killing 158 passengers on board. In 2016, 22nd of July, an Indian Air Force AN-32 crashed in the Bay of Bengal. The casualties in this aviation accident stood at 29. It took a lot of effort to finally give closure to the families of 29 soldiers who were lost in this incident. In 2019, barely 3 years later, on 3rd June, yet another Indian Air Force AN-32 crashed in a hilly terrain in Arunachal Pradesh after it lost contact with ground control, killing 13 people. Right after the Mangaluru air crash, we should have learnt our lessons, but as if to replay that entire tragedy, on the 7th of August 2020, an Air India Express flight 1344, once again a Boeing 737-800 flying the Dubai Kozhikode route, overshot the runway on landing at Calicut International Airport, breaking into four pieces, killing 18 passengers on board. The number of survivors, thankfully, in this crash was much more than the number of people who were left dead, including the pilots. And now you see in 2025, 12th of June, Air India passenger plane crashed in Ahmedabad, in Gujarat's Ahmedabad, barely seconds after takeoff. And after hours, Air India finally acknowledged that all except one on board had died. 230 passengers plus 12 cabin crew members were in this flight, and only one of them survived, a passenger sitting on seat 11A. Other than the huge tragedy that it is and the huge number of lives lost in this Ahmedabad aircraft crash, what has caught the world's attention is the fact that this is the very first time a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner has crashed, leading to casualties. This is the first fatal accident involving a Boeing 787, but this isn't the first time that the company's fleet has come under question, especially the Dreamliner series. In 2024, a United Airlines 787-8 suffered a dual inertial reference unit failure, causing a rapid loss of altitude and injuring 38 passengers. In the same year, an Al Nippon Airways 787 experienced a major hydraulic leak, prompting temporary grounding of its fleet. Again, in March 2024, a Sydney-Auckland flight underwent a sudden mid-air drop, injuring 50 people. Boeing has consistently defended its entire fleet in the face of criticism. But the fact of the matter is, all of these instances are true. But like I said, is this the reason for the crash is something we do not know for sure. The black box of the plane will have to be recovered. Flight data will have to be studied meticulously. The debris that is collected from the crash site will have to be examined before we can even start piecing together the reasons for what led to the crash of this Air India flight in Ahmedabad on Thursday. What we know so far is that the sole survivor told media organizations from the hospital where he was receiving treatment for his injuries that he heard a loud explosion right after takeoff. What we also know and is recorded is that the cockpit made a mayday call right after takeoff, but after that, communication from the aircraft stopped completely. What prompted this mayday call is something we do not know as well. While Indian investigators, including the DGCA, the Civil Aviation Ministry, the Union government has launched its own investigation, it will be joined by investigators sent from the US, the UK, especially because citizens of UK were also on board this flight. This was a flight that was going to London. Boeing, which is a US company, their investigators will also be there. GE, which is the engine manufacturer, is also expected to send its own team of investigators. And all of these multinational agencies will come together to investigate what really happened. But even as this continues, since the time of the crash, several aviation experts, former pilots, and incumbent pilots who have been flying in this sector, who have flown this particular aircraft, have spoken to several media organizations, pointing to what may have gone wrong, reiterating that these are just theories, these are things that are being offered as plausible causes, as possible causes for this particular aircraft crash. Primarily, three reasons are being pointed to as possible causes. First and foremost, an extremely rare and pretty much unheard of dual engine failure. Now, if anybody looks at this particular aircraft's footage, you will see that it takes off from the runway at Ahmedabad airport. It gains slight altitude, just about 600 feet or something, and right after that, it starts losing altitude before it becomes invisible behind a line of trees and buildings, and then you see a huge explosion. So, several aviation experts have pointed to how this could possibly be due to a dual engine failure. But they have also very pointedly spoken about how the possibility of a dual engine failure is extremely rare. It's a 1 in a million, 1 in a billion kind of a chance. Other than mechanical technical errors, experts point to how a dual engine failure could also result from fuel contamination or clogging. Now, that is something that will have to be thoroughly investigated as well. The second theory that is being offered is the possibility of a bird strike. In India, bird strikes are a huge concern. They have been flagged by multiple agencies, including pilots, stakeholders, multiple times in and around airports. You see, whenever the Aero India show is held in Bengaluru, you see a ban on sale of meat in and around the locality where Aero India is held. And several people ask us why. It's for precisely this reason. Meat is banned to prevent birds of prey from swirling around this particular area or the airspace where Aero India is being held to prevent the possibility of a bird strike. Aviation experts have pointed to how, in serious cases, engines can lose power if they suck in a bird. Several pilots who have spoken to media houses have spoken about how Ahmedabad, the airport, is notorious for bird sightings. Pilots have spoken about it multiple times. In fact, the Indian Parliament, when it was presenting its response in the Parliament over questions raised on instances of bird hits, bird strikes in Indian aviation sector, has pointed to how Ahmedabad has seen an increase in the possibility of bird strikes, bird hits in recent years. But at the same time, the pilots, the aviation experts also point out to how a bird hit is very rarely catastrophic and even rare that it can cause a dual engine failure. That is a possibility only if a bird hit or a bird strike impacts both engines at the same time. Other experts, more on the technical front, have pointed to how a disaster like this could happen if the aircraft's flaps are not extended during takeoffs. Now, the extent of retraction or extension of these flaps depend on various factors, including temperature. But what we have right now are just blurry videos, and this is why it is important to get the flight data, the black box, intact, so that all of these technical components can be looked into. Now, several aviation experts have pointed to how the flaps not being extended fully could have led to a disaster, simply because flaps are ultimately controlled by the pilots and there is a very precise level or a precise configuration that you'll have to have depending on the weather conditions, depending on the load of the aircraft, depending on the capacity of the aircraft, etc. But this argument also has a counter argument. Now, there are already systems in place to check whether the flap retraction or extension is in tune with what is required for that particular aircraft, with the kind of load it has and the kind of temperature it is braving. The aircraft in question has something called a configuration warning system that is automatically designed to alert the crew if there are any configuration errors in the extension or retraction of flaps. Now, since there are systems already in place to alert the crew if there are any errors in configuration, a lot of pilots, a lot of aviation experts suggest that that may not be the reason for this disaster. An investigation has now been ordered. Air India, from its end, has announced a compensation of 1 crore rupees for the families of those who lost their lives on this ill-fated aircraft. But several questions are yet to be answered. More than questions that need to be answered, people deserve to know what is it that the government as well as other stakeholders like companies like Air India, especially considering that over several years Air India has come under severe scrutiny by its own staff, ex-staff and passengers who have highlighted the poor maintenance and in-flight service offered by Air India when compared to other premium flyers. Given that its track record is not great, Air India is now being haunted for answers just as much as the DGCA and the Civil Aviation Ministry in India is. A tragedy of this magnitude should not be forgotten. Systems need to be put in place to instill confidence in people. Clearly, that confidence has been shaken, and there is mass hysteria already. You can see so many people commenting that they will never take an Air India flight again, but that is not really the answer. Flying is considered one of the safest means of transportation, of mass transportation. Trust me, I myself am apprehensive about flying, but clearly in the world we live in, there is no go than to choose flying for distant places, not simply because it's convenient, because studies and data show that more people die in road accidents every day than those dying in air crashes or aviation accidents worldwide. But these numbers do very little to instill confidence. People need assurance from stakeholders on what they will do to ensure passengers, crew members are safe. Until I come back to you with yet another episode of State of Play, do stay tuned to South First. Thank you so much for watching.